So another topic when we're talking about whack-a-mole is the other round, right, the next thing. So when we asked what are the drivers for process and document changes, the number one answer with 70% was we want to close a CAPA. And that is such a reactive approach when we're looking at how we should do things. Closing a CAPA, by the time we close it, it already happened. We should focus on prevention and being proactive rather than the current reactive model. The next one, or the next couple of them, what are the primary drivers? Regulatory requirements and mandates, fixing defects, again, reactive, customer inquiries and complaints. Only 37% said that the primary drivers are improving product quality. So that is so telling about our positioning as an industry. And when we looked at those innovators versus the laggards, you can see a stark contrast between how each of those groups are approaching change and configuration management. When you look at the bottom of the screen, fix problems as they occur, that reactive or firefighting mode, 82% of laggards said that that's what they do most of the time. And only 40% of innovators told us that they do that. As you move up the proactive rate, you can also see some very stark differences. On the very top around monitoring analytics and connected device data or a predictive approach, it's a 4-to-1. 40% of those who are innovators are doing it, only 10%. Continuous improvement, 60% of innovators are doing it compared to 9% of laggards. And you can see when it comes to plan, you also see a significant difference as it relates to the approach. What you can also see based on the data is the innovators, 100% of innovators are really focusing on improving. When we asked about the primary drivers for implementing product changes, 100% of innovators said that they're doing it to improve product quality or quality by design and improving manufacturability or the design for manufacturability process. And you can see the stark difference between the innovators and the laggards. So with that in mind, Hugo, why do medtech organizations need to shift from the reactive to proactive and ultimate predictive approaches, and especially as device complexity increases, how does change and configuration management become even more critical to this process?
So let me pick on the first point, right, the first question. And I would say is that, you know, we have such a big focus on the deficit issues, right, on the gaps that we have in our systems, and that's a necessary part of what we do. But we need to make sure that we're balancing that as well with the pursuit of a goal, a vision, right? That we have a vision for a better quality management system that can serve as a differentiator for us and help drive quality. We forget that, you know, if you're trying to pursue a world-class quality level, you need to focus on the drivers of that and not just trying to address the shortcomings of your system. So that it's important for us to be working towards a goal and a vision, not just away from issues. And as well, balancing that out, because otherwise you're just firefighting, and the firefighting, the reactive mode, actually has a trickle-down effect, right? You typically pull resources away from their day-to-day value-add responsibilities into managing a crisis, and what that has is an impact on the plans that have been put in place, and so you kind of create a bit of a vicious circle where you're always firefighting, and not really just moving your quality system and your products towards better quality.
Yep. The other byproduct is that we as an industry tend to reward firefighters.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. They fought the fire. But that also leads to a culture where the firefighters get rewarded, but those who prevent the forest fires are just doing their jobs. So, Bill, what's your perspective on shifting from this reactive to proactive and predictive approach?
So I completely agree with what Hugo said, and I particularly like the pictures on this slide about, the Smokey the Bear and preventing forest fires versus putting out fires. And yes, it's not just our industry. I think in general, everyone sort of rewards the firefighter, someone who is reactive and takes care of the situation and solves it. And I've worked in companies where those firefighters were actually the ones who, quote unquote, set the fire so that they could be the hero. And that's never a good thing. But I think us as an industry in the med tech, med device world, as well as I think any other company, any other industry, we need to be working on on trying to prevent defects, try to prevent errors and so forth, because that's where the real value of being a world-class manufacturer, a world-class producer of products is really recognized throughout the world by not fixing the problems that you've created, but not getting into those situations to begin with. And that is something that's hard to do because it's like when in my world in operational excellence, when I tell people that we have avoided a spend, that we've saved money that we didn't have to spend, they're like, oh, that's really good. But
yep.
if I save money because I've fixed a problem that has already cost us lots of money, they seem to appreciate that more. And so there's that disparity between, being preventive is something that is understood that we should do, but it's not recognized. Solving a problem that has cost us money in the past is something that's more recognizable and more reward.
Yep.
But we need to shift.
That's an excellent point. It really is a challenge to put a value on quality, putting a value on prevention, putting a number on that. Once the recall happened, we know how much that's going to cost us. And it becomes a lot easier to justify the means and the measures that need to take place in order to address that issue. But if you're able to prevent that recall, it's very hard sometimes to go to management and say, we need to invest a significant amount of money to prevent that from happening. Well, we don't know if it's going to happen or not. So we're taking a risk, and it's interesting how we're willing to take risks in certain areas in industry or in general compared to fighting the fires afterwards. So, Hugo, the second part of the question is, I know you're involved with devices whose complexity continues to increase, actually both of you. So why does configuration control become even more important and critical as complexity increases?
Yeah, this is a great point, right? The complexity of all devices continues to increase, and these complex systems have many moving parts. As an example, I had the privilege of working in vitro diagnostics, and you have assays and hardware, embedded software and automation software that need to come together. And these are all different disciplines, and it's rather than a project, it's a program, right, where you have multiple development projects working side by side, and sometimes not necessarily communicating really well. So all those disciplines really need to understand when and what changes had taken place to ensure that they adequately address the impact of them, right? Whether it's the change in the hardware, how it impacts the software, or a change in the automation impacting the hardware. Those need to be adequately addressed and ensure that they are evaluated. And, right, that's what provides us a guarantee that when the system is brought together, finally it's going to work, and that the work that we've done addresses all the issues. And the complexity really makes that a larger problem, and so the configuration management is one of the tools that helps us communicate those changes and keep everybody abreast and make sure that the evaluation that needs to take place does.
Yep. And Bill, one of the things we've talked about as part of the discussions for this research is the fact that more and more our devices are ending up being used or being operated by the end user. So we have to actually user-proof or patient-proof some of our devices, and that adds an additional layer of complexity. What are your thoughts around how we can deal with change in configuration management with these increasing complexities?
Well, so when you talk about being reactive versus proactive, obviously, from a design perspective, if you can build into your products the ability for the end user, be it a clinician, a patient, or whatever, to not make mistakes, to mistake-proof it, or to use the Japanese term, to poka-yoke it, that's really important, and that's something that I think, again, when we're talking about a product design and getting products out to market, those are the types of things that tend to be on the quote-unquote B list, right? You got to hit the requirements of making sure the product meets the requirements, for marketing and so forth. And all of those nice-to-have things, those are the things that tend to fall off the cart.
Yep, that's a very good point.